You're listening to 94.4 FM, Salford City Radio, the Friday Sports Show.
You're listening to Salford City Radio 94.4 FM, the Friday Sports Show, with your host, Jimmy Petruzzi. Bringing you news from the local area and area of the world, we aim to bring Salford to the world and the world to Salford. We're very fortunate in this show to have interviewed some of the world's best athletes, sports people, coaches, trainers, you name it, they've been on the show. We want to increase participation of sport and awareness, and we also have a segment featuring some of the world's most influential people in the field of psychology and related fields who join us on the show to give us an insight into their work. Today we have a very fascinating guest. He's a multi-award winning football coach and lecturer in sports science psychology who's going to give us an insight into his work, which no doubt our audience will find fascinating. So Lucas Capalbo, PhD, welcome to the show. Great to have you on board.
Thanks for having me.
Lucas, just sort of for our listeners, where did the journey begin for you in terms of the work that you do?
I would say that it began almost 10 years ago when I decided to study sports science.
Yeah.
I would say I was very passionate about sports in general, especially football and volleyball. But I wasn't gifted enough to become a professional or play at any high level. But I decided to dedicate my life and my career to the game. So I would have some kind of impact and be involved in the sport that I wanted so much.
Fantastic. So you decided to turn your attentions to the sports science and psychology. And in terms of your own sort of journey, what would you say some of the challenges have been in your journey, in your profession?
I would say the challenge, or the biggest challenge in sports, is the ability to find full-time jobs and jobs that pay enough for you to just solely dedicate yourself to coaching or to any other profession within sports. So a lot of times we need to collect a few hours here and there in different jobs, so we are commuting back and forth from different places. And then even we need to work in a different profession in order to pay the bills, and then in the evening go coach for very little to no money. So that's the biggest challenge I've experienced.
Yeah, that's really powerful stuff, I think, Lucas, because a lot of our listeners, many of them are into sport, but not just sport, a wide range of listeners. I think that's really, powerful because, obviously you spend a lifetime studying, a lot of hours studying, and obviously studying doesn't come cheap as well. You have to sort of, so our listeners sort of listening in, thinking, okay, the perception of, we sort of see, people at the top, but it takes a lot of hard work and dedication. Is that sort of a fair point? It takes a lot of hard work and dedication to sort of, keep studying and keep believing and sort of keep trying to be the best you can be?
Yes, definitely. It took me almost a decade to find a full-time job in sports where I could do what I wanted to do and just make my living out of the game and being able to coach and do other things, other projects on the side, also involved in sports. So it's a lot of patience in order for one to get to the level that they really want to be.
Yeah, and absolutely. And how do you sort of see like the sports science and the psychology in sort of sport? I mean, how much of has that sort of changed since the time you got involved and started sort of studying in the area? Have you seen any changes in sort of sports science and psychology around the way performers prepare mentally and physically over the years?
Yes, definitely a change from what I perceived as a young athlete myself to the beginning of my career and now to nowadays. There was mostly a change in people trying to be more forward-thinking, people trying to be more technical with what they're doing, trying to have like more justification behind their actions and their ideas, whereas in the past it used to be a lot about what I believe, what I think is right versus what is proving to be right, or there's a structure or framework behind it. It's still not ideal. There are very few clubs that I came across with that actually take a little more of a scientific approach to doing things versus the majority of coaches and clubs that still take the artistic part of it, or I do this because that's what I was That's what coaches did to me in the past. So we're moving very slowly but I do believe we're moving.
Yeah, and absolutely. And what's your take on, say, I suppose we sort of see, there's many different types of coaches, but predominantly within the spectrum, you've got sort of professional, like people who've played at the very highest level in, say, football, for example, and they go into coaching. But you've also got people who haven't played necessarily at the highest level. They may have been like an amateur, even semi-pro, but they sort of, go on the scene and do really well. I mean, do you think this sort of, what's your take on sort of on that in terms of what do you see as being sort of important from a coaching perspective? Because it's not a given that a top ex-player is going to be a good coach, but we sort of see people make a massive impact in the field of coaching who weren't necessarily played at the highest level in their sport. What are your thoughts on that, Lucas?
I've had a lot of conflict with those thoughts. For me, trying to be a coach without the professional level, was trying to find what is my role within the game.
Yeah.
And then I came to a conclusion that these two things, or these two levels of professional, are not mutually exclusive.
Mm.
I feel like any sport benefits from having both on board. And then if there's a coaching staff, and within that coaching staff, we can have someone who has an academic background and someone who has been a former professional in that sport. That's the best combination you can get. And I tell you why. The reasons why is that the knowledge of feeling or being on the pitch and knowing the game as a player is something that sometimes it takes us non-former professional players a lot of experience looking at and observing the responses from players in order to learn about those things. However, it's very common that these former players don't have the pedagogical and the technical instruction that a sports scientist would have. So, for example, they know how the game should be worked, but they not necessarily know how to build a plan of sessions and activities throughout the week so we can go from something a little bit simple to more complex in a way that the players can understand and practice on the pitch with more effectiveness.
That's really interesting stuff, and I think it's like you mentioned there. I mean, my sort of interpretation is sort of getting that balance is quite a good thing in terms of finding the sort of right balance in the staff is really important. I mean, I know it's difficult to answer, but everyone's going to have their own sort of thoughts on sort of what makes a good coach. I mean, every day I sort of see different, perspectives. And I mean, from yourself, who's sort of, got a strong academic background, you've got experience, obviously, of playing sport as well. What would you say? And obviously, you've done, well as a coach too. So, and I'm sure you'll do a lot more. But what's your take on what generally? What are some of the attributes that make a really effective coach, Lucas?
I feel like the first one is just to have the heart and the mind in the right place. And what I mean by the right place is just having the athletes at the center of everything you do, and understanding that behind the athletes there are young people or adults who are human beings, and they have their emotions, they have their good days and the bad days. So having that one first, I feel like it's something that if you add in the technical aspects, that will be the most complete coach. And these technical aspects include things like knowing how to have a vision, or having a vision for your team and your individual players, and knowing how to transform that vision into reality, which is actually how to deliver the message, how to structure your session, how to stop, how to start, how to design the sessions themselves, how to deal with problems. Because a lot of times they see a lot of people, they have the heart at the right place, they have their vision, and they know how to talk about the game like nobody else, but they lack qualities and techniques and ability to transform that vision into reality. They believe that they just say, let's play a 4-3-3, and then the players are going to go and they're going to excel on the pitch. It's not like that. It takes work, and it takes the progression for that to be done in the right way.
An interesting point they made there, and I sort of was reflecting to outside sport as well. I mean, I sort of lecture myself as well, and I'm sort of thinking in terms of that's like a transferable skill, whether it be teaching or maybe even business. And sort of some of those the sort of key points there I think are really useful in many other fields as well, not just sport, because obviously sort of it's one thing having that sort of passion and drive, but it's also having a sort of clear plan in place. And do you find, Lucas, I know sort of going off piece a little bit, do you find these sort of skills are quite useful even outside the field of sport as well, to be able to implement some of these sort of strategies outside sports?
Do you mean from the player's perspective or from the coach?
From the coach, sorry, yeah. So like some of the sort of ideas of to become an effective coach in sport, like they could be useful as well, even in other fields. Like for example, say for a lecturer, for a manager in business, could sort of some of these sort of insights might be useful for them.
Yeah, definitely, and it's kind of like the chicken and the egg in this case, because a lot of times I come across with different coaches and at a personal level, and then you kind of see the strengths and what I quote unquote can say weaknesses, and when they start coaching, you see that these things in their personal lives are very similar to them on the pitch. So, for example, someone who is really confident in person, they're really good in communication, they are very likely to be the same when coaching. Or someone who is really organized on their day-to-day, they know their things, they know their dates, they know their time. They are really on point with the organization, with the timing of the exercises. So it's definitely transferable, and then you can see that sometimes, especially for younger coaches, we try to make sure that we expose them to different ways of coaching, different ways of thinking, and then we also hope that these things will also affect them in a personal basis into being more confident talking to other people, being more organized on their work. There's a lot of times we do see that they try to become or to do certain things differently on their coaching style, but then they have a really hard time achieving that because it's really different in their personality. So we try to find a balance in terms of pushing those things that we believe they can be more successful with, but also respecting the personal constraints of those people, and then making sure that we can use their own characteristics and personality to be successful in the way that they can be.
No, that's interesting stuff. And in terms of yourself, your own sort of highlights, I mean, obviously sort of, your journey is going to continue. There'll be many, many highlights to come. But at this point, what would you say some of the sort of highlights for you have been so far, Lucas, in your career as a...
I would say the highlights on the academic side is just being able to get 11 years of academic studies from undergrad to PhD in different countries. I come from a background, I'm Brazilian, born and raised in Brazil. I come from a not really financially well background, so being able to do all these things, even though money was not in my favor, I think that was the biggest highlight. And the second highlight was, I would say it was in 2014, in my season in Sweden. And I also have a YouTube video, which is a TED Talk available online. It talks about the moment I changed my perspective about coaching. Because before I thought coaching was just about teaching the X and O's to young people, and then try to get them to win trophies and be happy. But the experience that I explained in that TED Talk was they taught me that coach is much more than that. I need to make sure that I work for the human being, the young person, so I can contribute my 2 cents to that person's life within the platform of football. So I think that was the biggest highlight on the pitch for me, because it definitely changed the way I perceived the game. It definitely changed the way I approached my coaching.
Yeah, and that's really interesting stuff. And I mean, certainly in sort of football, it's not easy to make it professionally, and many other sports aren't easy to sort of become a professional and stay in the game. The percentages, obviously, highlight that is not easy. A lot of variables contribute to someone making it and staying at the top, for sure. And in terms of, say, you mentioned there sort of, your own sort of journeys, which is sort of quite inspiring in terms of the dedication to sort of stay focused. And it's always difficult to give anyone sort of any advice in terms of, because we're all on our own journey. But if there's any sort of young people listening starting out on their journey, is there any sort of tips you can give, Lucas, in terms of, they're starting on a coaching journey themselves, whether they're sort of, like yourself, sort of, had a journey around the world, or maybe they're just sort of contemplating coaching. What are some of the things that you can sort of share that might be useful for them if they're going in the field of coaching?
Yes, definitely. The first thing is be on the pitch. Young coaches, they need to be shadowing people who are more experienced. They need to be working with younger ages. They need to be in contact with the game, because the best way for us to learn is not only from the academia, because the academia is going to give us the structure, but the biggest learning happens when we fail. And then we're not going to fail if you're not on the pitch, if you're not collecting cones, picking up balls for a more experienced coach, until you get the opportunity to run the warm-up, and then you do a good job, and then you evolve from that, because that's how it happened to me. The second thing is definitely be aware and understand that, unfortunately, the world of football is a nasty environment. And it's very, very, very unfair environment, because there's a lot of people who don't know what they're doing at the higher position, so they don't always hire the most qualified person. They don't look at the interests of the players and their coaches and their club. They look at their own interests. So it is a very unfair field. I don't want to do that to discourage people from joining, but they need to be really aware, and that's what we're trying to do. At our club in London, Bloomsbury Football, we're trying to play the game in a different way. We try to be fair with the way we recruit new coaches. We need to make sure that we are supporting coaches to be the best that they can be. So we need new people with new mentality. So once those old fellas leave the sport, we can do it better. We can do it different. So it becomes a fair place for us to work. So patience and is key here to find the right opportunities.
Yeah, and absolutely. There's some great points there, Lucas, for sure. I mean, certainly it resonates in terms of, like watching coaches, and sort of for me, I sort of, for a long time just watched other coaches and sort of, just get ideas, and also, that football is a tough game. It is a tough sport, like you said, and a lot of people will end up probably learning the hard way, really, but it is what it is, and there's a lot of good people in the sport, but also, like anything really, it does seem to produce maybe the competitiveness of the game. I don't know. It is what it is, really, but I think they're really useful sort of points for people sort of contemplating. And it's interesting you say, Lucas, because I sort of see, and I've seen for a long time, sort of like parents encouraging their sort of kids to play, which is great. We want young people to play the game, but there's that fine line, isn't it, where it's not easy to become a professional. It's not easy to sort of break through. And I suppose sort of on the other side, one of the things I always think is really important for players is to sort of carry on with their education, irrespective of obviously how talented they are, because you just never know in football. Is that something that you sort of, what are your thoughts on, say, players on their own journey, sort of carrying on, making sure they carry on doing their sort of schooling and education, if where possible?
Definitely. I think that should be the number one strategy for every coach, in order to make sure that we are trying to help them not only become the best players they can be, but also the best professionals that they can be in the future. Actually, in my definition of success within my coaching philosophy, my mission is just to help them become effective and good people at their profession. And I never say if that profession is football or not. This season, actually, I had a huge challenge with my under-16, because I've recently moved to London, to the UK, and I didn't know what the GCSEs were until I had the under-16.
Yeah.
And we had a huge conflict of sometimes the players were not really available for for matches or for sessions because they had to go and then they need to study and do their mocks for the GCSEs. Right now they're taking their exams, and I wish them good luck.
Mm-hmm.
And it really put that to the test because it's so easy for us coaches to say, focus on your studies, but also focus on the football as well. Until it's Friday evening, and then you don't have 11 to start the match on the day after. Because some of them are doing their mocks, so they're revising. And then it's me on that balance of like, how much should I insist to parents to say, oh, please, just give your kid to us for at least like 3 hours so we can play the game. So it really put me to the test and just to see what the values are. And then sometimes understanding the players, if they're going around the mocks or around these exams, or they're doing something for the academics that they need a little more of a relaxing time. It's making sure that the load and the volume of the session is a little lower. So right now, like, I'm putting a lot of elements of fun and a lot of structure. I'm trying to remove myself from coaching as much as I used to do during the peak of the season, to make sure that they just come in, they just relax, they laugh, they enjoy themselves, because the biggest game right now for them is the GCSEs and not football.
Absolutely, and that's a great point, Lucas. I think that's a really important point, and certainly for our listeners and listening in, and we have listeners from around the world who listen in. That's a sort of key point for me, because obviously life is as much as we love the game, football and sport. There's a bigger picture as well, and I think even if you do go on to make it as professional football at the highest level, it's still useful to have a background and sort of keep growing from an educational point of view as well as the game. And in terms of yourself, I mean, sort of your sort of vision, I mean, obviously what you're sort of comfortable sharing in terms of yourself, where do you see your vision going, Lucas, in terms of, I know you're involved in sort of, your project at the moment, but is there sort of any sort of thing you can sort of share and sort of your own vision going forward?
My vision, and I hope to use my life to go after this purpose, which is to make youth sports more fair for not only the players but for the coaches as well. I'm passionate about the field. I want to see the field growing. I want to see better people in it, and I want to make sure that we create a platform as adults where young people can come in. They have a great time. They are challenged. They learn. They fail, and they learn even more. And then once they're adults, they never leave the sport. And when they look back at their experience, they can have smiles. They can look back at their coaches and say, "Oh, I learned a lot from that guy. Oh, I learned a lot from that girl." Because a lot of times we look back at our own experiences and we not necessarily have great memories about sports. And I believe we have got this the wrong way. Because that's not the way people need to look back at their coaches. That's not how people need to look back at their experiences playing football, volleyball, basketball, whatever that is. So I feel like that's my vision, is to make sure that we have strong professionals, a strong sector, in order to have and give a better platform for kids to enjoy and become better adults in the future. And then hopefully that becomes sustainable.
Absolutely. No, that's sort of, really powerful takeaway, and sort of for anyone listening to our show who is involved in sort of coaching, or even not involved in coaching in any capacity in sport, I think it's a sort of powerful, takeaway. There is a sort of, a bigger picture to the game itself, and for any young player to look back in life and say, okay, and I'm sure that there'll be a lot of players who'll look back, Lucas, and sort of the influence that you've had on them, the positive influence you've had on them, in terms of, to reflect on that is a powerful thing, and to sort of go away and sort of use it as a platform to be the best you can be is sort of key. And I think certainly, that's a huge takeaway, even in the professional game, in terms of, it's not easy, and we see a lot of the stories about players who coaches talk about the stories of players who've gone on to make it, but there is a lot of players who unfortunately don't, and I think we owe it to them as sort of coaches to provide them the best opportunity to be the best they can be. But it's been great speaking to you, Lucas. It's been really informative. I've certainly sort of learnt from speaking to you. No doubt the listeners have as well. We wish you all the best for your future career, and no doubt you'll continue to succeed in sort of coaching. So great stuff. That was Lucas Capalbo, who was very kind of him to join us on the show, the Friday Sports Show, 94.5 FM, Salford City Radio. Your host, Jimmy Petruzzi, bringing you news from the local area and around the world.